My friends, there comes a moment in every sincere seeker's life when the heart asks a very honest question. What was all of this for? What was the purpose of the long nights, the unanswered prayers, the quiet suffering that no one else knew about? And it is here that I must gently invite you to re-examine the very foundation of what you have called faithfulness. You see, for centuries, humanity has believed that faithfulness means holding on just long enough so that perhaps at some future time God will reward you for your endurance. Yet I tell you this day, not as a theological argument, but as spiritual fact, God does not withhold anything from his own offspring. The belief that your suffering is some sort of spiritual test, the belief that God is waiting to see how much you can endure before he decides to bless you, this is part of the illusion that has kept humanity in darkness far longer than necessary. Your faithfulness in the difficult season was never about earning anything. It was not an examination, not a heavenly probation, not a measuring of worth. Your faithfulness was the movement of your consciousness toward the recognition of God's presence within you, even when all outward appearances insisted that you were alone. Somewhere in the depth of your being, beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, beneath the exhaustion, something in you refused to accept separation as truth. And that was faithfulness, not the endurance of pain, but the quiet insistence of the soul that God must be closer than the problem suggests. So today, I wish to reveal something that may feel surprising, yet it is the very essence of spiritual awakening. The reward for your faithfulness is not something God gives later, it is the clarity that is dawning within you now. The reward is recognition. The reward is the lifting of the veil. The reward is the quiet inner certainty that you are not a struggling human trying to reach God, but God's spiritual child in whom the fullness of divine life has always dwelt. You see, your suffering did not earn you anything. It merely dissolved a false identity that never belonged to you in the first place. And now, as the mist begins to clear, you are discovering what has been true from the beginning. God is, and you exist in God's presence, not as a beggar at the door, but as offspring of the infinite. This is where our journey begins. Let us look gently and honestly at that season of your life in which you felt weakest, because it is there, precisely there, that something beautiful was occurring beneath the surface, beyond your awareness, and entirely independent of your human strength. While you believed yourself to be merely enduring, something far more profound was taking place. You see, spiritual growth rarely announces itself with comfort. It rarely identifies itself through ease. Instead, it often arrives disguised as silence, as uncertainty, as the very feeling that nothing is happening at all. But I assure you, my friends, during those moments when you felt most abandoned, the roots of spiritual identity were quietly deepening within you. Now, I want you to understand something clearly. God never withdraws. God never steps away. God never leaves you to struggle alone. What felt like absence was not God's withdrawal, it was the dissolving of your reliance on the external, the dissolving of the belief that God must speak loudly, or act dramatically, or intervene visibly in order to be real. The silence you interpreted as distance was actually the stillness in which your consciousness was being prepared for recognition. It was the quiet hand of the Spirit loosening your grasp on the false identity that insists, I must do this. I must fix this. I must earn God's love. And so the night felt long, not because God was far away, but because your mind was releasing its old beliefs one thread at a time. Think of it this way. Before truth can be recognized, illusion must lose its authority. Before the fullness of divine sonship can be felt, the belief in separation must be weakened. And so life brought you into a season where the outer supports fell away, not to punish you, but to reveal that they were never your source. The people you leaned on could not answer. The prayers you repeated seemed to echo back without response. Opportunities closed, strength diminished, and you wondered what you had done wrong. But you had done nothing wrong. You were being brought inward. You were being shown through lived experience that the God you sought out there had never been external to your own being. You say, "But I felt so small during that time." Yes, and that is the mystery. The more the personal ego weakens, the more the spiritual identity emerges. The very moments when you believed yourself to be losing ground were the moments in which the soul was gaining territory. Every tear shed in genuine seeking, every breath taken in the midst of confusion, every step forward when you felt you could not take one more, all of this was the soul's movement toward truth. You thought you were failing. In reality, you were awakening. So I say to you today, do not despise that season. Do not rush to forget it. It was the womb of your rebirth. It was the quiet place where the seed of spiritual recognition was germinated. And though you could not see it then, you were growing precisely because you felt weakened. For it is only when human strength dissolves that divine strength becomes visible. Only when false identity crumbles that true identity reveals itself as the very life you are. This is the hidden journey you walked, even if you did not know it. Now, as we move deeper into this message, let us face something that human consciousness resists with great intensity. The true reward of your faithfulness is not measured in changed circumstances, but in changed identity. This is so essential that if you grasp only this one truth today, your entire spiritual journey will take on a new dimension. For the mind has been conditioned for centuries to believe that God's blessings come in the form of better situations, improved finances, restored relationships, relief from suffering, answers to prayers. And while these things may indeed appear as the outward expression of spiritual harmony, they are not the essence of the reward. They are the shadows cast by inner awakening. They are the footprints left behind when consciousness moves forward. The real reward, the only true reward, is the dawning realization of who you are in God. Let me say it plainly. Once you see yourself as God's spiritual offspring, complete in the infinite, untouched by the past, unbroken by experience, unseparated from your source, then even if nothing in your outer world changes, everything has already changed. For what is a circumstance except an appearance perceived through the lens of identity? If the lens remains clouded with fear, guilt, or unworthiness, then even favorable events will be interpreted through insecurity. But if the lens is cleared, if you stand in the awareness that your life is the expression of God's life, then even difficult appearances pass through your consciousness without shaking your foundation. Human consciousness says, "My circumstances must improve before I feel secure." Spiritual consciousness says, "My security is established in God, and the circumstances will conform to that knowing." You see, the external world does not bring you peace. External answers do not bring you certainty. They merely echo whatever consciousness has accepted as true. So when you were faithful in the darkness, you unknowingly planted the seeds for this shift of identity. What appears now as a reward is not God finally deciding to bless you. It is you finally becoming able to recognize what has been true all along. The reward is not something added to you. It is something revealed within you. Think of the sun hidden behind clouds. When the clouds part, we do not say the sun has returned. No, the sun was always present. Only our vision was obstructed. In the same way, when consciousness shifts from human identity to spiritual identity, we do not say God has rewarded me. We say I can finally see. And once you can see, once you know yourself as God's child rather than a struggling mortal, Every event in your life begins to take on new meaning. Challenges do not crush you. Delays do not discourage you. Even the unanswered prayer loses its sting because you understand that God's presence is not expressed through outcomes but through the truth of your being. So let this be clear. The great reward of faithfulness is recognition. Recognition of what? Recognition of your unity with God. Recognition that you are not living for God's approval, you are living out of God's fullness. Recognition that your life is not a journey toward divine favor, it is the unfolding of divine identity. When this recognition takes root, peace arises without cause, gratitude flows without reason, and trust becomes effortless, not because your circumstances have improved, but because you have awakened. This is the true reward. The rest will follow as naturally as the tide follows the moon. Now let us address with compassion and clarity the central obstacle that prevented you from recognizing your true identity during those darker seasons. It is something almost universal, something inherited from centuries of religious conditioning, and something so subtle that most never question it. It is what I call sinner consciousness, the deeply rooted belief that you are fundamentally flawed, spiritually defective, and in need of earning your way back into God's good graces. And as long as this belief holds authority in your mind, you cannot feel like God's child, no matter how many scriptures you read, no matter how earnestly you pray, no matter how long you endure. Understand this. You never lost your spiritual identity. You did not stop being God's offspring, but sinner consciousness made you feel separated from the very source that has never been absent. It placed a veil between your awareness and your reality. And so you lived as though something were wrong with you, as though you were unworthy of divine love, as though you had to prove yourself to an external deity in order to be accepted. But this belief, my friends, is an illusion, and like every illusion, it collapses the moment truth is recognized. You see, the belief in sin as identity, not as action but as identity, is the greatest misunderstanding humanity has ever embraced. Mistakes, errors, harmful deeds, these are human experiences, yes, but they do not define the spiritual essence of the individual. They belong to the realm of appearance, not the realm of being. Your true identity is established by God, not by your behavior. And what God establishes, no human action has the power to undo. Sinner consciousness whispers, you must be forgiven. Spiritual consciousness declares you were never condemned. Sinner consciousness says God is disappointed in you. Spiritual consciousness reveals God knows you only as his own expression. Sinner consciousness makes you beg. Spiritual consciousness invites you to recognize. During your difficult season, you could not feel the truth of your identity because guilt was standing as the intermediary between you and God. Not real guilt, not divine judgment, but psychological guilt, human guilt, inherited guilt, the kind of guilt that conditions the mind to see itself as unworthy of love, unworthy of joy, unworthy of the presence that is already within. Hear this clearly. Guilt is not a spiritual quality. It is a mental construct born of the belief in separation. And as long as you carry guilt as identity, you cannot feel the peace of being God's child even though you are God's child. The truth you could not feel was not absent. It was overshadowed by an identity that did not belong to you. So understand, the reason you struggled to sense divine nearness was not because God had withdrawn, but because you were viewing yourself through the lens of unworthiness. And when you view yourself as unworthy, you assume God must see you the same way. But this is the central illusion. God does not see through human eyes. God beholds you through divine truth. God beholds you as whole, not broken, as complete, not lacking, as spiritual, not sinful. And when you begin to behold yourself as God beholds you, the illusion of sinner consciousness dissolves like mist under the morning sun. This is why you could not feel like God's child before, not because it wasn't true, but because you were measuring yourself by a false identity that never existed in the mind of God. And today, that identity begins to fall away. There comes a moment in the life of every sincere seeker, perhaps slowly, perhaps suddenly, when something within begins to shift. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with thunder or wind. It arrives quietly, like dawn breaking through the smallest crack in the horizon. And if you are not attentive, you may mistake it for nothing at all. But I tell you, this moment is the turning point of your entire spiritual journey. It is the moment when faithfulness ripens into recognition. Up to this point, your faithfulness may have felt like endurance. You prayed, you waited, you held on, even when you felt empty. You stayed present, even when God felt silent. But there is a difference between faithfulness rooted in hope and faithfulness rooted in recognition. Hope says, perhaps one day God will come. Recognition says, God is already here and has never been absent. This turning point is the instant when the soul realizes that all the seeking outward, all the reaching toward a distant God, all the effort to please or persuade or perform, none of it was necessary. The presence you longed for was the very substance of your own being. The voice you strained to hear was the sound of your own true identity. The peace you prayed for was already within you, awaiting only your awareness. You see, there is a moment when the soul ceases striving and begins beholding. It is as though the inner eye finally opens and sees the ineffable truth. I and the Father are one, not someday, not after purification, not after spiritual achievement, but eternally, factually, immutably one. And this realization does not come because you prayed hard enough or waited long enough. It comes because the ego, exhausted from its own efforts, finally relaxes and allows the truth to reveal itself. At this turning point, faith takes on a new meaning. It is no longer a desperate clinging to promises. It becomes a restful assurance in what already is. You stop asking, when will God act? And instead you begin to recognize God is the very life living me. You stop bargaining with heaven and instead acknowledge heaven as the present condition of your being. You stop seeing yourself as a seeker searching for God and begin seeing yourself as the expression through which God reveals himself. My friends, this is the great shift. This is the awakening of spiritual maturity. This is the moment when faithfulness becomes sight, when the outer longing dissolves into inner illumination. That gentle inner knowing, that quiet certainty arising without reason, that peace that does not depend on circumstances, those are the signs that recognition has begun. And once recognition begins, it cannot reverse itself. The mind may doubt again, emotions may fluctuate, circumstances may challenge, but something in you has already seen, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. You have passed through the hour of endurance. You are entering the hour of realization. And from this point forward, every aspect of your life will begin to reorganize itself around the truth that has dawned within you. You are God's spiritual offspring, and your unity with the infinite is the foundation of every experience yet to unfold. This is the turning point. This is the moment of awakening, and from here, the journey becomes one of deepening, not searching. Now that we have come to the place where faithfulness begins to flower into recognition, let us look at what naturally follows. not through technique, not through willpower, not through the manipulation of spiritual laws, but through the effortless activity of truth expressing itself. When you know yourself as God's child, demonstrations arise organically. They are not miracles to be chased, they are manifestations of alignment. They do not occur to prove anything to you or others. They occur because consciousness has returned to its true center, and reality must reflect what consciousness knows. Let me share with you what happens when identity shifts from the belief, I am a struggling human, to the realization I am the offspring of infinite spirit. First, you will notice a peace that arrives without cause, a peace that has no relationship to what is happening around you. The outer world may remain unchanged for the moment, but the inner world becomes still, as though a gentle divine assurance has settled into your being. This is the earliest demonstration, not a changed circumstance, but a changed awareness. And that changed awareness is more valuable than any external blessing you could receive. I recall a woman who came to me burdened with decades of self-condemnation. She believed her past mistakes had permanently separated her from God. For years she tried to earn her way back through penance, through devotion, through relentless prayer. But nothing changed until one quiet afternoon when she grasped deeply, not intellectually, that God's love had never withdrawn, that her identity as God's child had never been tarnished. Within a month, her physical symptoms began softening. Her relationships calmed. Opportunities emerged, not because she did something, but because she recognized something. The cause was consciousness. The effects merely followed. Another man lived under constant financial pressure. Every decision came from fear, every plan from desperation. He prayed day and night for provision, thinking that if he prayed earnestly enough, God might intervene. But intervention never came in the way he expected. One day, as he sat in a moment of stillness, he felt a sudden realization. Infinite supply is the nature of God, and I live as the expression of that nature. That recognition dissolved the inner belief in lack, and as the inner belief dissolved, his external circumstances quietly reorganized themselves. A new opportunity appeared. A debt unexpectedly resolved. Ideas flowed that he had never considered before. His financial healing was not the reward of prayer, it was the demonstration of consciousness recognizing its source. And there was the teacher who constantly battled anxiety about her worth, always afraid of disappointing others. She pushed herself to exhaustion, believing her value depended on flawless performance. Yet the moment she recognized her identity as God's expression, not a personality striving to succeed, but a divine idea unfolding, her anxiety began to dissolve. Her work improved, not through pressure, but through peace. Her presence uplifted her students because she no longer needed validation from them. Her demonstration was not a new skill, it was a new consciousness. Hear me clearly. Every demonstration in your life will follow this same pattern. Not effort recognition, not fear identity, not striving rest, not outer achievement inner realization. And the demonstrations you experience may vary. A sense of peace where turmoil once ruled, clarity replacing confusion, opportunities appearing without strain, healing emerging gradually or swiftly, relationships harmonizing through your changed inner vision, decisions becoming effortless because they arise from intuition rather than fear. But in every case, the source is the same. Truth recognized becomes truth demonstrated. When you know you are God's child, the world cannot treat you as anything less. When you know you are whole, life cannot reflect fragmentation. When you know you are complete, circumstances cannot convince you of lack. This is not metaphysics, it is spiritual reality expressed through consciousness. So I say to you, do not look for demonstrations, look for truth. The demonstrations will follow as naturally as flowers follow spring. Now that we've spoken of demonstrations, let us turn gently towards something even more essential: how to live in the daily awareness of your true identity. For this truth we speak of is not meant to be glimpsed for a moment and then forgotten. It is meant to become the atmosphere in which you live, move, and have your being. But understand this clearly. Living from God-child consciousness is not another discipline to master, nor another spiritual achievement to pursue. It is, instead, the quiet and continual returning to what is already true. Let us begin with something simple. Before you take a single step into your day, before you speak, before you plan, before you respond, pause for a moment and recognize God is the life I am, not God with me, not God helping me, not God guiding me from afar, but God as the very consciousness by which I see, think, breathe, and exist. This one recognition, held even for a few seconds, shifts the entire foundation from which your thoughts and actions arise. You are no longer a human being trying to connect with God. You are the transparency through which God expresses himself. Throughout your day, pause often. Do not wait for long periods of silence or perfect conditions. A moment, a breath is enough. Turn inward and acknowledge, there is only one presence here, and that presence is my true identity. This is not affirmation, it is recognition. You are not trying to make something true. You are acknowledging what is eternally true. When challenges arise, do not rush into problem solving. Do not meet fear with effort. Instead, step back inwardly and remember, this appearance does not change my identity as God's child. You see, appearances have power only when they shape your sense of self. A problem seems overwhelming only when it convinces you that you are small, vulnerable, separate. The moment you return to recognition, the appearance loses its authority. It may still need practical attention, but you will approach it with the calm assurance of one who knows they stand in divine completeness. Now let us speak of meditation. For Goldsmith taught, the highest form of meditation is not thought but silence. Sit quietly without words, without striving, without intention. Allow yourself to be present in simple awareness, not seeking God, but resting in the truth that God is the very awareness by which you rest. There is nothing to achieve in this stillness, nothing to force, nothing to produce. You are simply placing yourself in the receptive state where truth can reveal itself. Wordless awareness is the doorway through which the infinite communicates without sound. As you practice this, you will find that insights arise naturally. Solutions appear without strain. Guidance comes without effort. This is not because you have become more spiritual, but because you have ceased interfering with the activity of God already within you. Let daily life become your spiritual classroom. When you speak to another person, silently remember, the same divine life that animates me animates them. When you feel fear, return to the truth. Fear cannot exist where God is, and God is the very essence of my being. When you feel lack, acknowledge, infinite supply expresses itself through me, not toward me. When you feel unworthy, rest in this: my worth is established by the one who created me. These recognitions, practiced gently and consistently, do not make you spiritual. They make you aware of the spirituality that has always been your essence. And as awareness stabilizes, your entire life, your decisions, your relationships, your responses begins to flow from a different center. You live from peace, not toward it. You live from abundance, not toward it. You live from identity, not in search of identity. In this way, daily life becomes not a struggle to maintain spiritual truth, but a continual unfolding of what you already are. Now we come to the natural unfolding of everything you have endured, everything you have recognized, everything that has been quietly shaping you beneath the surface. You are stepping into a new phase not because God has suddenly decided to bless you, not because your worthiness has increased, not because you have crossed some spiritual threshold by effort, but because your consciousness has awakened to what has always been true. And when consciousness changes, life itself must respond. This is not a reward. It is a law. Spiritual identity, once recognized, becomes the light by which you walk, the vision by which you interpret your world, the atmosphere through which every experience is filtered. Let me tell you what your faithfulness has prepared you for. It has prepared you to live without fear of appearances. In the past, circumstances seemed powerful, overwhelming, threatening. They dictated your emotional state, your decisions, your sense of self. But now you see that appearances are only forms arising from the level of consciousness that perceives them. And so, with your inner foundation established in truth, you meet each appearance with calm recognition. This cannot alter my identity. This cannot separate me from God. And instantly the appearance loses its dominion. Your faithfulness has prepared you to stand in peace, even when others around you cannot find their center. Your presence brings clarity where there was confusion, assurance where there was fear, not because you speak the right words or perform the right actions, but because your consciousness radiates the truth that others have forgotten. You become, without effort, a transparency for divine presence. Light does not try to illuminate, it simply shines. Your faithfulness has prepared you to enter relationships differently. You no longer seek to be completed by others. You no longer need validation, affirmation, or approval to feel whole. Your sense of identity no longer depends on how you are treated or understood. You recognize the divine life in yourself, and so naturally you recognize it in others. You respond from love, not from need, from wisdom, not from fear. And as your consciousness softens, the people around you shift not because you demanded change, but because your inner state invites it. Your faithfulness has prepared you to receive without attachment. Opportunities, blessings, resources may now appear with ease, but you no longer cling to them as your source. You no longer panic when something shifts or ends. You understand that supply is not something God gives, it is something God is. And because God is the essence of your being, supply flows through you in whatever form is needed, whenever it is needed. Your faithfulness has prepared you to live from intuition rather than effort. In the past, decisions required strain. You weighed options, feared consequences, second-guessed yourself. But now, inner stillness reveals itself as guidance. You sense what is right, not through logic alone, but through the quiet knowing that arises from unity. Intuition becomes the voice of God expressing through your consciousness, and you find that following this inner direction brings harmony without struggle. Your faithfulness has prepared you to live without the weight of your past. No longer do you measure yourself by old mistakes, old wounds, or old stories. You understand that your spiritual identity was never touched by any of it. The past loses its emotional charge because it belongs to an identity you no longer claim. You look at your history now with compassion, not condemnation, because you see that every step, every tear, every moment of confusion was guiding you toward this awareness. Above all, your faithfulness has prepared you to live as one who knows. God is the reality of my being, and all that I do flows from that truth. This is the light you now walk in. This is the consciousness you carry into every moment. This is the state of being for which your difficult season prepared you. And from this point on, life becomes not a struggle toward God, but the continual unfolding of God within you. And now, as we conclude this time together, let us gather gently the threads of all that has been revealed. You have walked through darkness, not because God withdrew, but because the veils of false identity needed to dissolve. You remain faithful, not to earn divine favor, but because something in you, something deeper than fear, stronger than doubt, more enduring than suffering, knew there must be more than appearances, more than circumstance, more than the human sense of life. And that inner knowing was the whisper of your true identity calling you home. Today, you stand in a new light, not a light you created, but a light that was always your inheritance. You are beginning to see yourself not as a seeker, not as a sinner, not as a struggler, but as God's spiritual offspring, whole, complete, unseparated, unbroken, eternal. And as you recognize this truth, the shadows that once frightened you lose all substance. Fear cannot cling to one who knows their unity with the infinite. Guilt cannot imprison one who recognizes that nothing in their past has ever changed the truth of their being. Loneliness cannot endure in the consciousness that understands, I and the Father are one. So I say to you now, with the quiet certainty of spiritual law, you have not been moving toward God. You have been awakening to God as your very life. Every step has led inward. Every prayer has lifted the veil. Every hardship has loosened the grip of the false self so the true self might shine. And now, as recognition dawns, you realize that the journey was not for God to come closer, it was for you to finally see. Carry this recognition into your moments, into the silence of early morning, into the conversations of your day, into the decisions you make and the challenges you face. Let this truth go ahead of you. I am God's child, and nothing can alter what God created. When fear whispers, return to recognition. When doubt arises, return to recognition. When old habits attempt to reclaim your attention, return to recognition. Not with force, not with struggle, but with a gentle understanding that truth is not something you maintain, it is something you allow to be revealed. My friends, the work of this path is simple. Return to recognition, again and again, until recognition becomes the atmosphere in which you live. And as you do, your life will unfold not as something you must control, but as the outpouring of the divine nature expressing itself as you. So, welcome into the light of your true identity. Welcome into the awareness that you are and always have been the beloved, complete, eternal expression of God. Nothing can add to this truth. Nothing can take away from it. Nothing can improve it. Nothing can diminish it. You are what God is expressing, and that is the final word on your being. Rest in this. Live from this, let this truth guide you gently into every tomorrow.